In with the national lead, President Obama would probably like nothing more than to take a knee, run out the clock on what's been, to put it kindly, a challenging year. To put it less kindly, you could call it in a nod to Judith Viorst's famous children's book, Barack Obama and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Year. But before the president could say aloha to Washington and aloha to Hawaii, where the first family will be vacationing for the next 16 days, the president took part in the unofficial tradition of a year-end presidential news conference. This year, the president watched as his administration fumbled the rollout of healthcare.gov. The public learned of the massive extent of the NSA's reach thanks to damaging leaks. There was the IRS scandal, questions about what happened in Syria. I could go on and on at length. So the president may have been expecting the first question he got from the Associated Press.
Has this been the worst year of your presidency?
I got to tell you, Julie, that's not how I think about it. I look at this past year. There are areas where there obviously been some frustrations, where I wish Congress had moved more aggressively. If you're measuring this by polls, my polls have gone up and down a lot through the course of my career.
About those polls that the president claims not to be too worried about. Here's the latest CNN ORC poll showing his approval rating 41%. It matches the all-time low for him in our polling. So was this the worst year of his presidency, and where does the administration go from here? Well, let's bring in our panel. CNN political commentator and Republican strategist Kevin Madden, Washington bureau chief for USA Today, Susan Page, and co-host of CNN's Crossfire, Van Jones. So the president was asked what his biggest mistake was this year, and this is what he said.
It didn't happen in the first month, first 6 weeks, in a way that was at all acceptable. And since I'm in charge, obviously we screwed it up.
He's talking about Obamacare there. Was Obamacare the biggest mistake of the year, you think?
What a year when the questions at the end of the year are, is this your worst year ever? What was your biggest mistake? Will you ever improve in the polls because you're in such a terrible state? I mean, can you imagine? Yes, Obamacare, his biggest legislative achievement, now his biggest problem, and the one that has defined him in a way that's very damaging, that likens him really, I think, in a lot of ways, to President George W. Bush and the Iraq War. Very different enterprises, but their effect on these presidencies, I think, are quite similar.
Would you have advised the president to have answered any of these questions differently, Kevin? Was there anything? I mean, I thought he did a pretty good job of staying on message and not answering questions, which is what politicians do.
Yeah, I think the overall goal here was to do exactly that, was to stay on message and not make any news. And I think for the large part, he was very successful today. I actually think he answered that question about what his biggest mistake was perfectly, to tell you the truth, because to answer it any differently, I think he would really hurt his credibility. And if the president is going to rebound, if he's going to rebuild these numbers, he has to get that trust back and that level of credibility back with the American people, because right now it's at an all-time low.
Van, how does he rebuild? 41% approval, that's really low. That's George W. Bush low. And George W. Bush, as you know, never climbed out of that hole. He never got back to 50%, which is where you need to be over 50. How does the president do it?
Well, first of all, it was very interesting. You know, he was definitely doing his best Muhammad Ali rope-a-dope, just lay on the ropes, take the tough questions, and hope that the next round's going to be better. He was trying to get on Air Force One today, and he succeeded. He did not make news, which was his goal. But in the background, while we focus on the lumps, there are some good things beginning to emerge and surface. The economy is beginning to come forward. One of the quarters got revised up to 4% growth.
I was actually surprised he didn't talk about that more.
I would have been pounding on that. I would have been 4% growth. That's, I mean, you're chasing China at that point. I mean, you're really, so that was good. The other thing, he missed a huge opportunity because of the fatigue to pound on the fuel prices. Just think if gas prices were going up the way they're going down. He would be getting killed on that. So I think when you have this level of fatigue and just get me to the vacation, you miss some opportunities. He missed some opportunities to brag on himself today.
Well, I think one of the reasons why is because I think the White House is very aware that there is a canyon between some of the economic indicators, the metrics of it, and the way people feel about it, like whether or not they feel the economy is growing at 4% or they feel like there's a lot of economic optimism right now. I still think there's a certain level of economic exasperation that's at its zenith. Now, whether or not that changes over the next year remains to be seen. But I think that was the delicate balance that the president and the White House had today.
There was an interesting moment, a few interesting moments. One when ABC's John Karl asked the president about this difficult year and what it meant to him on a personal level.
It's not that I don't engage in a lot of self-reflection here. I promise you, I probably beat myself up even worse than you or Ed Henry does on any given day. But I've also got to wake up in the morning and make sure that I do better the next day.
Yeah, look, like
He seemed a little downtrodden there.
yeah, well, I mean, yeah, obviously, but I think that
Van
kind of
was
stuff.
right. He looked very tired.
He's
today.
tired.
He
He's
did look very
tired. I mean, listen, you're trying to bicycle across the country, and your opposing party has the brake on the whole time. You get a little tired. But I thought it was really interesting that those were the moments where I think people like him a little bit more, when he's not just trying to push through all his talking points, and he gets a little bit more human. I think what you're going to see is you get 6 more months of this kind of economic performance. Unemployment is continuing to go down. You do have better growth. You got the stock market there. And if he can then start hammering on this question around minimum wage and put the Republicans in a box of minimum wage, because the Tea Party folks even want minimum wage to go up, you start to see a little bit of a shift, I believe.
I think the only way you see a shift here, and he gets out of this hole, is with reality. You need the economy to continue doing what it started to do, which is to pick up. You need unemployment to drop some more, and most of all, you need the Affordable Care Act to work. You need the health, the website to be working now on the front side. You need to work on the back side when it goes to the insurance companies. That is the only thing that will save President Obama from George W. Bush's fate is reality.
And he seemed to be setting the stage for that. He seemed to be saying, like, 2014, that's going to be a big year. We're going to have a lot of good things happening. It was kind of buried in this Eeyore kind of mood.
He also needs to come back. The next big speech he'll give, we think, will be the State of the Union address on the 20th. He needs to show a lot more energy than he was showing there.
I think you're right, but I think this is where I disagree with Van, is when folks see the president saying that I beat myself up, they do not care. They don't care that the president's hard on himself. What they want to know is that there's some concrete solutions, that he's going to do something to right the ship, and he's going to do something to work with Congress. I thought he was still pretty defiant when he was talking about Congress and still saying things like there's a lot of brinkmanship up there. Well, folks know that, but they want to see the president take a leading role in stopping that brinkmanship or building the legislative coalitions that he needs to get things done on Capitol
Kevin's
Hill.
right about this. You see his internal struggle. He's got to make a decision. Does he want to breathe more oxygen on this bipartisan moment and really be the guy standing for that, or does he want to keep punching back on the Republicans? He has not made up his mind. It was obvious today.
And I thought Speaker Gingrich earlier made a good point, where he said he started off the year in a very defiant tone, and he's ended it in a very defiant tone. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not that changes from here to the State of the Union, and whether or not the State of the Union does provide a bigger platform for maybe some potential progress.
One other interesting answer he gave when our own CNN's own Breonna Keeler asked him about the upcoming debt ceiling fight. Some Republicans have suggested that they're not just going to raise the debt ceiling without getting some sort of concession. And here was his response to that.
To repeat, the debt ceiling is raised simply to pay bills that we have already accrued. It is not something that is a negotiating tool. It's not leverage.
Jack Lew, the Treasury Secretary, is saying we have 7 weeks to raise the debt ceiling. Where are we headed here?
Well, how did the showdown work for the Republicans last time?
Not so great.
Not so well. So I'm assuming that it's like they've been burned on the stove and they're not going to jump back on it, and that there will not be the kind of showdown politics that we saw the last time around. Although, they're Republicans, they're Tea Party Republicans. I don't know. Maybe they'll do it again.
I still think this is an issue that Republicans believe we need a showdown on, because it's a spending issue, and they believe, most Republicans believe they're aligned with the American public sentiment on that. I also found it interesting that he said, I'm not going to negotiate, but I'm willing to talk. Well, guess what? That's negotiating.
Right. That is negotiating. Stick